The bridegroom left his uncle's house and went to live in the house of his bride. As well as being a wife, Khadijah was also a friend to her husband, the sharer of his inclinations and ideals, to a remarkable degree. Their marriage was wondrously blessed, and fraught with great happiness, though not without sorrows of bereavement. She bore him 6 children, 2 sons and 4 daughters. Their eldest child was a son named Qasim, and Muhammad came to be known as Abul Qasim, the father of Qasim, but the boy died before his 2nd birthday. The next child was a daughter whom they named Zainab, and she was followed by 3 other daughters, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima, and finally by another short-lived son. On the day of his marriage, Muhammad set free Baraka, the faithful slave he had inherited from his father, and on the same day Khadijah made him a gift of one of her own slaves, a youth of 15 named Zayd. As to Baraka, they married her to a man of Yathrib to whom she bore a son, after whom she came to be known as Ayman, the mother of Ayman. As to Zayd, he and some other youths had recently been bought at the great fair of Uqa by Khadijah's nephew Hakim, the son of her brother Hizam, and the next time his aunt visited him Hakim had sent for his newly acquired slaves and invited her to choose one of them for herself. It was Zayd that she had chosen. Zayd was proud of his ancestry. His father Haritha was of the great northern tribe of Kalb whose territory lay on the plains between Syria and Iraq. His mother was a woman of the no less illustrious neighboring tribe of Tay, one of whose chieftains at that time was the poet knight Hatim, famous throughout Arabia for his chivalry and his fabulous generosity. Several years had now passed since Zayd had been taken by his mother to visit her family, and the village where they were staying had been raided by some horsemen of the Bani Cain, who had carried the boy off and sold him into slavery. Haritha, his father, had searched for him in vain, nor had Zayd seen any travelers from Kalb who could take a message from him to his parents. But the Kaaba drew pilgrims from all parts of Arabia, and one day during the holy season, several months after he had become Muhammad's slave, he saw some men and women of his own tribe and clan in the streets of Mecca. If he had seen them the previous year, his feelings would have been very different. He had yearned for such an encounter, yet now that it had at last come it placed him in a quandary. He could not deliberately leave his family in ignorance of his whereabouts. But what message could he send them? Whatever its gist, he knew, as a son of the desert, that nothing less than a poem would be adequate for such an occasion. He sung verses which expressed something of his mind, but implied more than they composed expressed. Then he accosted the Kalbite pilgrims and, having told them who he was, he said, "Speak unto my family these lines, for well I know that they have sorrowed for me. Though I myself be far, yet take my words unto my people, at the holy house. I dwell amidst the places God hath hallowed. Set them aside the sorrows ye have grieved, weary not camels, scouring the earth for me, for I, praise be to God, am in the best of noble families, great in all its line." When the pilgrims returned home with their tidings, Haritha at once set off for Mecca with his brother, Kabi, and going to Muhammad they begged him to allow them to ransom Zayd, for as high a price as he might ask. "Let him choose," said Muhammad, "and if he chooses you, he is yours without ransom, and if he chooses me, I am not the man to set any other above him who chooseth me." Then he called Zayd and asked him if he knew the 2 men. "This is my father," said the youth, "and this is mine uncle." "Me thou knowest," said Muhammad, "and thou hast seen my companionship unto thee, so choose thou between me and them." But Zayd's choice was already made, and he said at once, "I would not choose any man in preference to thee. Thou art unto me as my father and my mother." "Out upon thee, Zayd," exclaimed the men of Kalb. "Wilt thou choose slavery above freedom, and above thy father and thine uncle and thy family?" "It is even so," said Zayd, "for I have seen from this man such things that I could never choose another above him." All further talk was cut short by Muhammad, who now bade them come with him to the Kaaba, and, standing in the Hijr, he said in a loud voice, "All ye who are present, bear witness that Zayd is my son, I am his heir and he is mine." The father and the uncle had thus to return with their purpose unachieved. But the tale they had to tell their tribe, of the deep mutual love which had brought about this adoption, was not an inglorious one, and when they saw that Zayd was free, and established in honor, with what promised to be a high standing amongst the people of the sanctuary such as might benefit his brothers and other kinsmen in years to come, they were reconciled and went their way without bitterness. From that day the new Hashemite was known in Mecca as Zayd ibn Muhammad. Among the most frequent visitors to the house was Afiya, now Khadijah's sister-in-law, the youngest of Muhammad's aunts, younger even than himself, and with her she would bring her little son Zubair, whom she had named after her elder brother. Zubair was thus well acquainted with his cousins, the daughters of Muhammad, from his earliest years. With Afiya came also her faithful retainer Salma, who had delivered Khadijah of all her children, and who considered herself to be one of the households. As the years passed there were occasional visits from Halima, Muhammad's foster mother, and Khadijah was always generous to her. One of these visits was at a time of severe and widespread drought through which Halima's flocks had been seriously depleted, and Khadijah made her a gift of 40 sheep and a Hauda camel. This same drought, which produced something like a famine in the Hijaz, was the cause of a very important addition to the household. Abu Talib had more children than he could easily support, and the famine weighed heavily upon him. Muhammad noticed this and felt that something should be done. The wealthiest of his uncles was Abu Lahab, but he was somewhat remote from the rest of the family, partly no doubt because he had never had any full brothers or sisters amongst them, being the only child of his mother. Muhammad preferred to ask for the help of Abbas, who could well afford it, being a successful merchant, and who was close to him because they had been brought up together. Equally close, or even closer, was Abbas's wife, Fadl, who loved him dearly and who always made him welcome at their house. So, he went to them now and suggested that each of their 2 households should take charge of one of Abu Talib's sons until his circumstances improved. They readily agreed, and the 2 men went to Abu Talib, who said when he heard their proposal, "Do what ye will, but leave me Aqil and Talib." Jafar was now about 15, and he was no longer the youngest of the family. His mother Fatima had borne yet another son to Abu Talib, some 10 years younger, and they had named him Ali. Abbas said he would take charge of Jafar, whereupon Muhammad agreed to do the same for Ali. It was about this time that Khadijah had borne her last child, a son named Abdullah, but the babe had died at an even earlier age than Qasim. In a sense he was replaced by Ali, who was brought up as a brother to his 4 girl cousins, being about the same age as Ruqayya and Kulthum, somewhat younger than Zainab and somewhat older than Fatima. These 5, together with Zayd, formed the immediate family of Muhammad and Khadijah. But there were many other relatives for whom he felt a deep attachment, and who have a part to play, large or small, in the history which here is chronicled. Muhammad's eldest uncle, Harith, who was now dead, had left many children, and one of the sons, his cousin Abu Sufyan, was also his foster brother, having been nursed by Halima amongst the Bani Sa'd a few years after himself. People would say that Abu Sufyan was of those who bore the closest family likeness to Muhammad, and amongst the characteristics they had in common was eloquence. But Abu Sufyan was a gifted poet, perhaps more gifted than his uncles, Zubair and Abu Talib, whereas Muhammad had never shown any inclination to compose a poem, though he was unsurpassed in his mastery of Arabic, and in the beauty of his speech. In Abu Sufyan, who was more or less his own age, he had something of a friend and a companion. A little closer by blood kinship were the numerous children of his father's full sisters, that is, of Abd al-Muttalib's 5 eldest daughters. Amongst the eldest of these cousins were the children of his aunt Umamah, who had married a man named Yash, of the North Arabian tribe of Asad. He had a house in Mecca, and it was possible for a man who lived amongst a tribe other than his own to become, by mutual alliance, the confederate of a member of that tribe, into which he thus became partly integrated, sharing up to a point its responsibilities and its privileges. Harb, now chief of the Umayyad II branch of the clan of Abdu Shams, had made Yash his confederate, so that by marrying him Umema could almost be said to have married a Shamsite. Their eldest son, named after her brother Abd Allah, was some 12 years younger than Muhammad, and the two cousins had a great affection for each other. Umema's daughter Zainab, several years younger than her brother, a girl of outstanding beauty, was included in this bond. Muhammad had known and loved them both from their earliest childhood, and the same was true of others, in particular of Abu Salama, the son of his aunt Bara. The powerful attraction which centered on Al-Amin, as he was so often called, went far beyond his own family, and Khadijah was with him at that center, loved and honored by all who came within the wide circle of their radiance, a circle which also included many of her own relations. Particularly close to her was her sister Hala, whose son, Abu Alaz, was a frequent visitor to the house. Khadijah loved this nephew as if he had been her own son, and in due course, for she was continually sought after for help and advice, Hala asked her to find a wife for him. When Khadijah consulted her husband, he suggested their daughter Zainab, who would soon be of marriageable age, and when the time came, they were married. The hopes of Hashim and Muttalib, the two clans counted politically as one, were set upon Muhammad for the recovery of their waning influence. But beyond all question of clan, he had come to be considered by the chiefs of Quraysh as one of the most capable men of the generation which would succeed them and which would have, after them, the task of maintaining the honor and the power of the tribe throughout Arabia. The praise of Al-Amin was continually upon men's lips, and it was perhaps because of this that Abu Lahab now came to his nephew with the proposal that Ruqayya and Kulthum should be betrothed to his sons Utbah and Utayba. Muhammad agreed, for he thought well of these two cousins, and the betrothals took place. It was about this time that Ayman became once more a member of the household. It is not recorded whether she returned as a widow, or whether her husband had divorced her. But she had no doubt that her place was there, and for his part Muhammad would sometimes address her as mother, and would say of her to others, "She is all that is left me of the people of my house." Somewhat before these last-mentioned happenings, about the time when all was taken into the household, when Muhammad was 35 years old, Quraysh decided to rebuild the Kaaba. As it then stood, the walls were just above the height of a man, and there was no roof, which meant that even when the door was locked access was easy, and recently there had been a theft of some of its treasure which was stowed in a vault that had been dug inside the building for that purpose. They already had all the wood that was needed for the roof. The ship of a Greek merchant had been driven ashore and wrecked beyond repair at Jeddah, so they had taken its timbers to serve as rafters, and there happened to be in Mecca at that time a Copt who was a skilled carpenter. But such was their awe of the Kaaba that they hesitated to lay hands on it. Their plan was to demolish its walls, which were built of loose stones, and to rebuild it altogether, but they were afraid of incurring the guilt of sacrilege, and their hesitation was greatly increased by the appearance of a large snake which had taken to coming every day out of the vault to sun itself against a wall of the Kaaba. If anyone approached, it would rear its head and hiss with gaping jaws, and they were terrified of it. But one day, while it was sunning itself, God sent against it an eagle, which seized it and flew away with it. So, Quraysh said among themselves, "Now we may indeed hope that God is pleased with our intent. We have a craftsman whose heart is with us, and we have wood, and God hath rid us of the serpent." The first man to lift a stone from the top of one of the walls was the Makhzumite Abu Wab, the brother of Fatima, Muhammad's grandmother, but no sooner had it been lifted than the stone leapt from his hand and returned to its place, whereupon they all drew back from the Kaaba, afraid to proceed with the work. Then the chief of Makhzum, Walid the son of the now dead Mughira, took up a pickaxe and said, "I will begin the raising for you, and going to the Kaaba he said, "O God, fear not, God, we intend naught but good." Thereupon he knocked down part of the wall between the black stone and the Yemenite corner, that is, the southeasterly wall, but the rest of the people held back. "Let us wait and see," they said. "If he be smitten, we will raise no more of it, but restore it even as it was, but if he be not smitten, then is God pleased with our work, and we will raise it all to the ground." The night passed without mishap, and Walid was again at work early next morning, so the others joined him, and when the walls were all down as far as the foundation of Abraham, they came upon large greenish cobblestones like the humps of camels placed side by side. A man put a crowbar between two of these stones to lever one of them out, but at the first movement of the stone a quaking shudder ran through the whole of Mecca, and they took it as a sign that they must leave that foundation undisturbed. Inside the corner of the black stone, they had found a piece of writing in Syriac. They kept it, not knowing what it was, until one of the Jews read it to them, "I honor God, the Lord of Becca. I created her the day I created the heavens and the earth, the day I formed the sun and the moon, and I placed round about her 7 inviolable angels. She shall stand so long as her 2 hills stand, blessed for her people with milk and water." Another piece of writing was found beneath the station of Abraham, a small rock near the door of the Kaaba which bears the miraculous print of his foot. "Mecca is the holy house of God. Her sustenance cometh unto her from 3 directions. Let not her people be the first to profane her." Quraysh now gathered more stones, in addition to those they already had, so as to increase the height of the building. They worked separately, clan by clan, until the walls were high enough for the black stone to be built once more into its corner. Then a violent disagreement broke out amongst them, for each clan wanted the honor of lifting it into its place. The deadlock lasted for 4 or 5 days, and the tension had increased to the point of alliances being made and preparations for battle begun, when the oldest man present proposed a solution. "O men of Quraysh," he said, "take as arbiter between you, about that wherein ye differ, the first man who shall enter in through the gate of this mosque." The precinct round the Kaaba was called a mosque, in Arabic masjid, a place of prostration, because the rite of prostrating oneself to God in the direction of the holy house had been performed there since the time of Abraham and Ishmael. They agreed to follow the old man's counsel, and the first man to enter the mosque was Muhammad, who had just returned to Mecca after an absence. The sight of him produced an immediate and spontaneous recognition that here was the right person for the task, and his arrival was greeted by exclamations and murmurs of satisfaction. "Idus al-Amin," said some. "We accept his judgment," said others, "it is Muhammad." When they explained the matter to him, he said, "Bring me a cloak." And when they brought it, he spread it on the ground, and taking up the black stone, he laid it on the middle of the garment. "Let each clan take hold of the border of the cloak," he said. "Then lift it up, all of you together." And when they had raised it to the right height, he took the stone and placed it in the corner with his own hands, and the building was continued and completed above it. It was not long after this outward sign of his authority and his mission that he began to experience powerful inward signs, in addition to those of which he had already been conscious. When asked about these, he spoke of true visions which came to him in his sleep, and he said that they were like the breaking of the light of dawn. The immediate result of these visions was that solitude became dear to him, and he would go for spiritual retreats to a cave in Mount Hira not far from the outskirts of Mecca. There was nothing in this that would have struck Quraysh as particularly strange, for retreat had been a traditional practice amongst the descendants of Ishmael, and in each generation there had been 1 or 2 who would withdraw to a solitary place from time to time so that they might have a period that was uncontaminated by the world of men. In accordance with this age-old practice, Muhammad would take with him provisions and consecrate a certain number of nights to the worship of God. Then he would return to his family, and sometimes on his return he took more provisions and went again to the mountain. During these few years it often happened that after he had left the town and was approaching his hermitage, he would hear clearly the words, "Peace be on thee, zero messenger of God," and he would turn and look for the speaker, but no one was in sight, and it was as if the words had come from a tree or a stone. Ramadan was the traditional month of retreat, and it was one night towards the end of Ramadan, in his 40th year, when he was alone in the cave, that there came to him an angel in the form of a man. The angel said to him, "Recite," and he said, "I am not a reciter," whereupon, as he himself told it, the angel took me and whelmed me in his embrace until he had reached the limit of my endurance. Then he released me and said, "Recite." I said, "I am not a reciter," and again he took me and whelmed me in his embrace, and again when he had reached the limit of mine endurance, he released me and said, "Recite," and again I said, "I am not a reciter." Then a third time he whelmed me as before, then released me and said, "Recite in the name of thy Lord, who created. He createth man from a clot of blood. Recite, and thy Lord is the most bountiful, he who hath taught by the pen. Taught man what he knew not." He recited these words after the angel, who thereupon left him, and he said, "It was as though the words were written on my heart." 3. But he feared that this might mean he had become a jinn-inspired poet or a man possessed. So, he fled from the cave, and when he was halfway down the slope of the mountain, he heard a voice above him saying, "O Muhammad, thou art the messenger of God, and I am Gabriel." He raised his eyes heavenwards, and there was his visitant, still recognizable but now clearly an angel, filling the whole horizon, and again he said, "O Muhammad, thou art the messenger of God, and I am Gabriel." The prophet stood gazing at the angel, then he turned away from him, but whichever way he looked the angel was always there, astride the horizon, whether it was to the north, to the south, to the east, or to the west. Finally, the angel turned away, and the prophet descended the slope and went to his house. "Cover me! Cover me," for he said to Khadijah, as with still quaking heart he laid himself on his couch. Alarmed, yet not daring to question him, she quickly brought a cloak and spread it over him. But when the intensity of his awe had abated, he told her what he had seen and heard, and having spoken to him words of reassurance, she went to tell her cousin Waraka, who was now an old man and blind. "Holy, holy," he said. "By him in whose hand is the soul of Waraka, there hath come unto Muhammad the greatest nameless. 5 Even he that would come unto Moses. Verily Muhammad is the prophet of this people. Bid him rest assured." So, Khadijah went home and repeated these words to the prophet, who now returned in peace of mind to the cave, that he might fulfill the number of days he had dedicated to God for his retreat. When this was completed, he went straight to the Kaaba, according to his wont, and performed the rite of the rounds, after which he greeted the old and the blind Waraka whom he had noticed amongst those who were sitting in the mosque, and Waraka said to him, "Tell me, Zero son of my brother, what thou hast seen and heard." The prophet told him, and the old man said again what he had said to Khadijah. But this time he added, "Thou wilt be called a liar, and ill-treated, and they will cast thee out and make war upon thee, and if I live to see that day, God knoweth I will help his cause." Then he leaned towards him and kissed his forehead, and the prophet returned to his home. The reassurances of Khadijah and Waraka were followed by a reassurance from heaven in the form of a second revelation. The manner of its coming is not recorded, but when asked how revelation came to him, the prophet mentioned 2 ways. "Sometimes it cometh unto me like the first revelations, reverberations of a bell, and that is the hardest upon me. The reverberations abate when I am aware of their message. And sometimes the angel taketh the form of a man and speaketh unto me, and I am aware of what he saith." The revelation, the second time, began with a single letter, the earliest instance of those cryptic letters with which several of the Quranic messages begin. The letter was followed by a divine oath, sworn by the pen which had already been mentioned in the first revelation as the primary means of God's teaching men his wisdom. When questioned about the pen, the prophet said, "The first thing God created was the pen. He created the tablet and said to the pen, 'Write.' And the pen answered, 'What shall I write?' He said, 'Write my knowledge of my creation till the day of resurrection.' Then the pen traced what had been ordained. To the oath by the pen is followed by a second oath, by that which they write, and amongst what they, that is the angels, write in heaven with lesser pens on lesser tablets is the Quran's celestial archetype, which subsequent revelations refer to as a glorious recitation, Quran, on an inviolable tablet, and as the mother of the book. The two oaths are followed by the divine reassurance. Noon. By the pen, and by that which they write, no madman art thou, through the grace of thy Lord unto thee, and thine shall be a meed unfailing, and verily of an immense magnitude is thy nature. After the first messages had come there was a period of silence, until the prophet began to fear that he had incurred in some way the displeasure of heaven, though Khadijah continually told him that this was not possible. Then at last the silence was broken, and there came a further reassurance, and with it the first command directly related to his mission. By the morning brightness, and by the night when it is still, thy Lord hath not forsaken thee nor doth he hate thee, and the last shall be better for thee than the first, and thy Lord shall give and give unto thee, and thou shalt be satisfied. Hath he not found thee an orphan and sheltered thee, and found thee astray and guided thee, and found thee needy and enriched thee? So, for the orphan, oppress him not, and for the beggar, repel him not, and for the bountiful grace of thy Lord, proclaim it." In accordance with these last two words, he now began to speak about the angel and the revelations to those who, after his wife, were the nearest and dearest to him. As yet he had no demands to make upon them, except that they should not divulge his secret. But this situation did not last long. Gabriel came to him one day on the high ground above Mecca, and struck with his heel the turf of the hillside, whereupon a spring gushed forth from it. Then he performed the ritual ablution to show the prophet how to purify himself for worship, and the prophet followed his example. Then he showed him the postures and movements of the prayer, the standing, the inclining, the prostrating and the sitting, with the repeated magnification, that is, the words Allahu Akbar, God is most great, and the final greeting as Salamu Alaikum, peace be on you, and again the prophet followed his example. Then the angel left him, and the prophet returned to his house, and taught Khadijah all that he had learnt. And they prayed together. The religion was now established on the basis of the ritual purification and prayer, and after Khadijah the first to embrace it were Ali and Zayd and the Prophet's friend Abu Bakr of the clan of Taym. Ali was only 10 years old, and Zayd had as yet no influence in Mecca, but Abu Bakr was liked and respected, for he was a man of wide knowledge, easy manners, and an agreeable presence. Many would come to consult him about this or that, and he now began to confide in all those whom he felt he could trust, urging them to follow the Prophet. Many responses took place through him, and two of the earliest to respond to the call were a man of Zurah, Abdu Amr, the son of Awf, a distant kinsman of the Prophet's mother, and Abu Ubaidah the son of Al-Jarrah of the Bani Harith. In connection with the first of these, Abdu Amr, a precedent of importance was established. Amongst the most striking features of the revelation were the two divine names Rahman and Rahim. The word Rahim, an intensive form of Rahim, merciful, was current in the sense of very merciful or boundlessly merciful. The still more intensive Rahim, for lack of any concept to fit it, had fallen into disuse. The revelation revived it in accordance with the new religion's basic need to dwell on the heights of transcendence. Being stronger even than Ar-Rahim, the All-Merciful, the name Ar-Rahman refers to the very essence or root of mercy, that is, to the infinite beneficence or goodness of God, and the Quran expressly makes it an equivalent of Allah. Invoke God, Allah, or invoke the infinitely good, Ar-Rahman, whichever ye invoke, his are the names most beautiful.
This name of goodness was very dear to the Prophet, and since the name Abdu Amr, the slave of Amr, was too pagan, he changed the new believer's name to Abd Ar-Rahman, the slave of the infinitely good.
Nor was the son of Awf the only man whose name he changed to Abdurrahman.
Some of the earliest responses were promoted initially by motives which could not be ascribed to any human attempt to persuade.
Abu Bakr had long been known throughout Mecca for his ability to interpret dreams, and one morning he had an unexpected visit from Khalid, the son of a powerful Shamsite, Sa'id ibn Alas. The young man's face still showed signs of having been recently aghast at some terrifying experience, and he hastened to explain that during the night he had had a dream which he knew must be significant, though what it meant he did not understand.
Could Abu Bakr tell him the meaning of it?
He had dreamed that he was standing at the edge of a great pit in which was a raging fire so vast that he could see no end to it. Then his father came and tried to push him into it, and as they were struggling on the brink, at the moment of his greatest terror, he felt round his waist the firm clasp of two hands which held him back despite all his father's efforts. Looking round, he saw that his savior was Al-Amin, Muhammad the son of Abdillah, and at that moment he awoke.
"I wish thee joy," said Abu Bakr.
"This man who saved thee is the messenger of God, so follow him, nay, follow him thou shalt, and shalt enter through him into Islam, which shall safeguard thee against falling into the fire." Khalid went straight to the Prophet, and having told him of his dream he asked him what his message was, and what he should do. The Prophet instructed him, and Khalid entered Islam, keeping it a secret from his family. It was about the same time that another man of Abdu Shams, a merchant on his way home from Syria, was awoken one night by a voice crying in the desert, "Sleepers, awake, for verily Ahmad hath come forth in Mecca."
The merchant was Uthman, son of the Umayyad Affan, and grandson, through his mother, of one of Abd al-Muttalib's daughters, al-Hakim al-Bayda, the Prophet's aunt.
The words sank into his heart, though he did not understand what was meant by coming forth, nor did he recognize that the superlative Ahmad, most glorified, stood for Muhammad, glorified. But before reaching Mecca he was overtaken by a man of Taim named Talha, a cousin of Abu Bakr, and Talha had passed through Basra, where he had been asked by a monk if Ahmad had yet appeared amongst the people of the sanctuary.
"Who is Ahmad?" said Talha. "The son of Abd al-Muttalib's son Abdallah," answered the monk.
"This is his month, in which he shall come forth, and he is the last of the prophets." Talha repeated these words to Uthman, who told him of his own experience, and on their return, Talha suggested that they should go to his cousin Abu Bakr, who was known to be the closest friend of the man now uppermost in their minds. So they went to Abu Bakr, and when they told him what they had heard he took them at once to the Prophet so that they could repeat to him the words of the monk and the words of the desert voice. Having done this, they made their professions of faith. A fourth conversion, no less remarkable than these in the way it took place, was that of Abdullah ibn Masudi, a young confederate of Zurah. Telling of it himself, he said, "I was at that time a youth just grown into manhood, and I was pasturing the flocks of Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, when one day the Prophet and Abu Bakr passed by. The Prophet asked me if I had any milk to give them to drink. I replied that the flocks were not mine but entrusted to my care and I could not give them to drink. The Prophet said, 'Hast thou a young ewe that no ram hath ever leaped?' I said I had, and brought her to them. Having tethered her, the Prophet put his hand to her udder and prayed, whereupon the udder swelled with milk, and Abu Bakr brought a boulder which was hollowed like a cup. The Prophet milked her into it, and we all drank. Then he said to the udder, 'Dry,' and it dried. A few days later Abdallah went to the Prophet and entered Islam. Nor was it long before he had learned from him 70 surahs too by heart, being exceptionally gifted in that way, and he soon became one of the best and most authoritative reciters of the Quran. The prophet had been distressed by the period of silence from heaven, yet his soul still shrank from receiving the tremendous impact of the divine word, which itself affirmed in a not yet revealed verse, "If we sent down this Quran upon a mountain, thou wouldst see it prostrate in humility, rent asunder through fear of God." The impulse which had prompted him to cry out, cover me," still came to him at times, and one night when he was lying wrapped in his cloak there broke in upon his seclusion a divine command sterner and more urgent than any he had yet received, bidding him warn men of the day of judgment. Thou who art wrapped in thy cloak, arise and warn. Thy Lord magnifies. Thy raiment purifies. Defilement shuns. For when the trumpet shall be blown, that shall be a day of anguish, not of ease, for disbelievers. Another night soon after this, he was aroused by further commands telling him of the intensity of worship expected from him and his followers, and fully confirming his apprehensions of a great burden of responsibility that was to be laid upon him. Thou who art wrapped in thy raiment, keep vigil all the night save a little, half the night or lessen than half a little, or add to it, and with care and clarity chant the Quran. Verily we shall load thee with a word of heavy weight. 5 In the same passage was also the command, and invoke in remembrance the name of thy Lord, and devote thyself unto him with an utter devotion. Lord of the East and of the West, no God but he. Him therefore take, on him place thy reliance. 1 There came also other revelations, gentler in tone, which confirmed and increased the reassurances already given to the prophet, and on one occasion, visible to him alone, as was normally the case, the angel said to him, "Give unto Khadijah greetings of peace from her Lord." So, he said to her, "O Khadijah, here is Gabriel who greeteth thee with peace from my Lord." And when Khadijah could find words to speak, she answered, "God is peace, and from him is peace, and on Gabriel be peace." The first adherents of the new religion took the commands addressed to the prophet as applying to themselves, so like him they would keep long vigils. As to the ritual prayer, they were now careful not only to perform the ablution in preparation for it but also to make sure that their garments were free from all defilement, and they were quick to learn by heart all that had been revealed of the Quran, so that they might chant it as part of their worship. The revelations now began to come more copiously. They were immediately transmitted by the prophet to those who were with him, then passed from mouth to mouth, memorized and recited a long and rapidly increasing litany which told of the ephemeral nature of all earthly things, of death, and of the certainty of the resurrection and the last judgment, followed by hell or paradise. But above all it told of the glory of God, of his indivisible oneness, his truth, wisdom, goodness, mercy, bounty and power, and by extension it continually referred to his signs, the marvels of nature, and to their harmonious working together which testified so eloquently to the oneness of their sole originator. Harmony is the imprint of oneness upon multiplicity, and the Quran draws attention to that harmony as a theme for man's meditation. When uninhibited by the presence of hostile disbelievers, the believers greeted each other with the words given to the prophet by Gabriel as the greeting of the people of paradise, "Peace be on you," to which the answer is, "And on you be peace," the plural being used to include the two guardian angels of the person greeted. The revealed verses of consecration and of thanksgiving also played an increasingly significant part in their lives and their outlook. The Quran insists on the need for gratitude, and the sacrament of thanksgiving is to say praise be to God the Lord of the worlds, whereas that of consecration or dedication is to say in the name of God, the infinitely good, the all-merciful. This was the first verse of every surah of the Quran, and following the example of the Prophet, they used it to inaugurate every Quranic recital, and by extension every other rite, and by further extension every act or initiative. The new religion admitted of nothing profane.